Today I read the 11th through 15th essays in the Breaking Smart series, Software is Eating the World. And in this one, he talks quite a bit about pastoralism. And I looked up a quick definition of pastoralism. And the definition that I got was the practice of herding as a primary economic activity of a society. And I feel like that doesn't really narrow it down very well if you aren't reading the essay. But basically, the context that he gives in the essay, it's kind of this idea of people who are all doing this one thing, kind of like going down the path that everyone else is doing. Kind of this, I see it kind of as this drone, but this herd mentality. Everyone's doing the same thing, and not being willing to break that mold, not being willing to go outside of that and say, hey, like this is where the world's at now. This is where the world's going. I'm going to go after that. Just sticking to where everyone else is at. So when he says pastoralism, I think this is kind of the point that he's getting at here. I wanted to focus especially on one little section that he was talking about, or one concept that he talks about. And that was that in the 50s, there was kind of all this futuristic stuff of, in the future, we'll have flying cars to be able to transport ourselves. And here we are, almost 2019 right now. And we don't have flying cars, at least not for the consumer. Like an average person can't just get a flying car, right? And fly it around. And, what we do have is kind of this new technology of driverless cars or drones and stuff. And it's like this pastoralism mindset has caused that to be almost villainized, to be evil. Like, it's only like military drones and, driverless cars are going to injure more people than other people. And it's almost like pastoralism likes this futuristic idea if it can predict it. If it's like, oh yeah, like we predicted we'll have flying cars, that's like the cooler thing anyway, right? Like everybody is their own pilot. There's this freedom of being able to go there. And it's like the driverless car is more like, oh, you don't have as much freedom. And he gives a quote that at least has been attributed to Henry Ford. Not sure if it actually is Henry Ford, but the quote is, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have demanded faster horses. And it's just this idea that we get in, if you get into this pastoralism mindset of, kind of things go along in the same way that they have been going, you start having things like this where it's like, all you kind of can comprehend is, oh, we want faster horses. When in reality, Henry Ford comes out with this invention that, like kind of makes that unnecessary. You have this driverless carriage, and people took that in basically the worst possible way of like, oh, well, are you saying we won't need horses ever again? Like we won't use horses. Whatever are we going to do? But realizing like now, like people ride horses for fun. It's not a big deal. And people are doing the same thing now with driverless cars. It's like, are we never going to drive? Like we'll never have any more drivers again. Nobody will be able to drive cars. It's like, yeah, like since we still see people, riding horses for fun, we're going to probably see people driving cars all the time still. It just will be more for fun. It won't be this mandatory thing that people have to do. And there's almost this mindset on these people who drove the driver or the horseless carriages of they were degenerate dependents, beholden to big corporations, big cities, and Standard Oil. This mindset that they were dependent on these things that were there. And I think I just so many times you see this history stuff of history that has not changed. Like people still have this mindset. And I think you see the same thing with smartphones of like, oh, all these people are becoming so dependent on their smartphones. They're becoming dumb basically because they have their smartphones. They don't need to be smart anymore. And I mean, like I want to preface this. I understand what they're saying. Like, yeah, there can be a lot of bad effects to that. But at the same time, people get in this mindset of, oh, like don't conform to the pattern of where the world is going, like, oh, with all of these cars, these horseless carriages, don't go along with that. But realizing like it was taking over no matter what, like it was inevitable. It was going to be there. And so you can resist that. Same with phones. It's like, oh, don't get a smartphone because it's evil or you'll become dependent on it. It's like, yeah, in some ways that's kind of true, but look at now, like everyone drives cars. It's normal. Like, it's not like, oh no, like you're dependent on cars. It's like, yeah, everyone's dependent on cars. I think it'll be the same with smartphones. Like everyone is going to be dependent on smartphones, but that will just kind of be the new normal. Like it kind of already is, having smartphones that you're dependent on. And the last thing, like I kind of want to touch on with this, so he doesn't really talk about in his article, but I was thinking of, and I think you kind of have to be able to differentiate between like future things that are going to be like necessary and things that are fads. So for instance, I think cars, obviously, like they were a necessary change, like inevitable, like it was going to happen. And now they've been here for a long time, definitely through several generations. And then seeing what things are fads. So when you think of fads, you probably think of things like, like popular videos that like got big all of a sudden and then they faded away, or things like silly bands or fidget spinners, where it's like they explode for a while and then they just go away and almost nobody talks about them again. I see this on a little bit of a bigger scale. I happen to think that things like Facebook, I think in another 10, definitely 20 years, Facebook will basically be gone, or at least be changed into something almost unrecognizable. And I just think that because I think it's this fad of people wanting these social networks and stuff. But I think in another 10 to 20 years, it's going to completely change into something else. I don't know what yet, but I think it will. Whereas I think smartphones are kind of that future. They might change a little bit as well, but people are going to be using them all the time. They won't be a fad. They're going to be kind of that necessary change of the future. And you just have to pick which hill you're willing to, fight your battle on. It's like, hey, I mean, if you want to live your life without having smartphones, kudos to you. Like, you might have a way more enjoyable life, but it's just not going to be the way that most of the rest of the world functions. And I mean, in reality, what's cooler, like having that grandparent who's like, oh, I don't know how to do anything like all of these things that the young kids do, or like how cool would it be to have a grandparent that's like super into technology and knows how to use it all, and it's like, oh, I'll figure out your TV problems for you. It's like, wow, that'd be so cool. And what if you were that grandparent, like in the future, you kept up with technology, you kept up with what was happening with software and all that, and it's like you were able to help people. And I think that's such a cooler testimony to being able to adapt and change the world instead of just sticking to what you've always known and not being willing to adapt.